All right, thank you everyone. Good afternoon. We thank you for gathering with us today for our second Kentucky Coalition for Advancing Education meeting. My name is Toni Constatman. I am the Chief Communications Officer here at the Kentucky Department of Education. Each of you have been selected to be a member of the statewide coalitions that, as we look to examine what is working and what we might improve about our education system. For this meeting, we will continue our efforts to examine what our system exists currently, how we might envision educational opportunities for the next generation, and how we might hold ourselves accountable to the high promise of offering a quality education to each and all of Kentucky's children over the next couple of years. Before we move into our agenda, let me introduce our Commissioner and Chief Learner, Dr. Jason E. Glass, to provide some opening thoughts for today. Dr. Glass.
Thanks, Toni. Good evening, everyone. It's great to connect with you. I regret that I'll only have a few minutes with you here. I have a couple of other engagements I have to run to that I'm double booked on and then later into this evening, but I really believe that this group is important enough that I come on and express my thanks again for the work that you're doing and stress the importance of this group's work going forward. I know that you'll be sifting through lots of data and really charting the course ahead for the future of education in our Commonwealth. We told you early on that there was a lot of work to do and it was going to move really fast. And so you're going to experience that today. So things are going to happen. There's a critical step that you'll be taking part in today, and that is evaluating the data that came from all of our listening tours. We had around 1,200 participants in those over a period of over a month, and we have hours of interview material that you'll be sifting through that we've done work to try and summarize for you, but we're hoping that you can help us pull out the major themes that are within those. Based on the conversations that we had last time, we thought that a couple of good ways to approach that analysis is through the lenses of students and communities and thinking about what do the concepts and ideas that emerge from the listening tour data, what does that mean for students and what does it mean for our communities? So a couple of things to think about. The work that you're doing today will help develop a full picture of where we're headed in the state, and it's working toward that event or release of a plan or vision for the state that we hope to have available in the fall. So thanks everyone. I look forward to hearing where this group goes. I'll try my best to pop back in and check in and see how everyone's doing, but I'm grateful for the time with you and the work that you're about to do.
Thank you, Dr. Glass, for your opening words and sharing your challenge of focusing on children and communities for the group today. Hello, everyone. I'm Paul Leather with the Center for Innovation and Education. As we get started, let me also quickly once again introduce our team from the Center of Innovation and Education that are with us here today. And I'll ask that they raise their hand like I did last week as I introduce them to you. Gretchen Morgan, our managing partner. Lauren Ho, who has the important job of managing Zoom today. Jenny Poon, our CIE fellow. Sarah Lynch, our learning design and storytelling partner. And Donnie Tran, who will once again be our facilitator for today. Our agenda and purpose will be to listen to and look for some of the reflections and thoughts of your fellow Kentuckians, as Dr. Glass mentioned, particularly as we think about the dimensions of both identity and community in schooling. To do this, we will map some of the insights you have found through your empathy interviews that you've been doing this past week. And I really want to thank you and congratulate you for so many of them being done and providing excellent data for today. As well as we'll take a look at key themes coming out of the listening tour data. A goal today will be to create some common perceptions or profiles of folks in the Commonwealth as we think about what is emerging about the current state and your aspirations for the future state of public education in Kentucky. Now I'm going to turn it over to Donnie Tran. Donnie?
Hi, everybody. It's great to see you all again. I just wanted to quickly just put our community agreements back up and let you scan over them with your eyes. But I want to emphasize one particular community agreement that's going to be important today. The fourth one down, acknowledge many forms of expertise. You know, as a teacher or school leader listening to the voices of people in empathy interviews, it's easy to think that we know just what pattern this viewpoint is going to fit into. Now, the benefit of the makeup of this coalition is that we have family members, community members, students, each of whom may see the same person as fitting into a different pattern that they are familiar with, and with which we as educators are likely to be less familiar. That's the power of this coalition. So let's be sure to maximize that power today by listening to and trusting the different expertise that each brings to hearing and making sense of the empathy data. Now, I was reflecting last time, just thinking about how much expertise and energy we have in this room, and realizing that one of the things that we value about this coalition is the ability to co-create this space. And so I reached out to two incredible leaders in this room and asked them if they would be willing to facilitate the connections exercise for our group today. And Adrian Usher, who's an assistant superintendent in Bullitt County, and Melissa Hagans, who's a retired educator and community leader, have both agreed graciously to lead us through an exercise for us to get to know each other better. When they're done, I'm going to gently request that another couple of people step up and agree to lead the next connections exercise. So if you are interested, be thinking about that, about raising your hand. But until then, I'm going to hand it over to Adrian and Melissa.
Thank you very much. Melissa and I are excited to do this activity, and we will get started. Can I share my screen?
Adrian, I think that the slides you sent.
I see it. Yep,
Yes,
I sent it to you. There you go. So what we're going to do is Identity Web. I kind of looked at our agenda ahead of time, what we were going to do, and put together, kind of answer the question I am. We all individually have different identities that make us up, that make up who we are and what we've experienced in life and our perspectives and our thinking. And many of those factors shape us as individuals, but also as a collective community. These factors can be characteristics about yourself, or they can be categories. In addition, these factors really become part of our identity in how we see ourselves within the community, and also how we're aware of ourselves individually. And they can also be things that society may attribute to us as well, these different identities. So you have a choice to do this activity. You can jot it down on a sheet of paper if you want to pull up a Google Doc and do this and just list it. But however you want to choose to complete the activity independently is up to you. But as you're thinking about that statement, I am, and answering those questions, these are really some concepts to guide you when we talk about our different identities that make up who we are as we've come along our personal and professional journey. Identities might be consistent over our lives, while others might change. For example, maybe the first time you became a father or a mother, that might be an identity. In addition, it could be professional, different skills and experiences you've had that have changed your roles in life. Other identities also feel as that's who we are at the center of, in all situations we might be in, whether that's our personal or our professional life. These identities make up our core. Other identities might feel more like a background, or could depend on the situation. Maybe recently or at some point in your life, you've been a caretaker for an elderly parent, and that only lasted for a certain period of time. Some identities that we have can be labels that others put on us, and that they see us having while we may not see those. So we're going to give you about 5 minutes to work on your independently, your identity web, answering those question I am with those guiding concepts for you.
I will send you to breakout rooms right now.
I think, Lauren, are we, Adrian, do you want people to just work on this and then we'll send them into breakout rooms?
Yeah, work on this for a few minutes and then we'll go into breakout rooms. Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you.
We have about a minute left. Okay. If you will take a few minutes to finalize your identity web, a few seconds, I mean. So now we're going to go into community share time and talking about the different identities, thinking about those guiding concepts. In your small groups, we would like for you to choose 2 of the 4 questions here and talk through those as those identities, whichever 2 you choose. Have they stayed the same? Are they central to who they are? And how have they had you to come to where you are today, if that makes sense, as you talk about this. So you will have about 5 minutes in your small groups to choose 2 of those 4 questions.
Great. And just like the last meeting, we're asking folks to help us maintain our commitment to transparency. And if just have one person in the group record the breakout, even though it's quite short, we'll be doing this each time we break out from the main room. All right, Lauren, whenever you're ready.
Your attributes, your characteristics, how are they going to, make a contribution to our students and our stakeholders as well? Anybody want to share a thought?
And what we can do is if you want to type your response, and then Melissa, if you want to give everybody a few, maybe about 30 seconds to type your response, and then we'll kind of all hit enter at once, and it'll kind of all waterfall down.
Yeah, it'll all fall into place. Yes, great. So let's just go to the chat and just, throw it in there. What are you thinking? How are you feeling? Great, Michelle. But stay focused on your driving.
And we'll give it a few more seconds.
Mm-hmm.
Then we can. Everybody ready? Thumbs up. And
all right,
you can hit enter and let them all in.
All right, here we go.
Okay, there we go. Students be more productive and successful. Cool. Contributions are very important, most definitely. Okay. All right, I'm not seeing any new, there we go. Okay. A sister to a special needs brother. Yes, yes. Advocate for all students.
Wow. Thank you both so much for leading us through that. I'm seeing so many things that are resonating across our common experiences, and yet all the things that make us distinct and unique, and that we bring those perspectives to this work. So that was very exciting to see. And it was great to get to connect with the small group that we were in a little bit more intimately. So thank you so much for that. If you are interested in joining up to lead the next one, I'll invite you to do so. I'll shoot an email out and see if anybody would like to help support that, our community building next time around. So I just want to reframe for everyone here and just remind folks of where we're going. So on today, we're going to be focusing in on getting into the listening tour data and making sense of it, and then doing the empathy interview data as well and getting underneath that. And focusing also particularly on the dimensions of identity and community. Next time, we will build on what we did today by really framing out the beginning of the report of the current state of education in the Commonwealth, and really getting down to those user profiles that are going to drive the way that we explain the current state of the system. And we'll be focusing there on comparability and prioritization, which is something that's really connected to that topic of what we'll talk about next time. On June 22nd, we'll then really shift our focus to looking at the future and what is our vision for how we can make Kentucky education serve the students of the Commonwealth. And then we'll focus on the 29th, thinking forward about how we support the local laboratories of learning to do their work. All right, and I'll hand it over to Gretchen to talk a little bit about the topics, the dimensions that we're going to cover today.
Thanks, Donnie. And hi, everybody. As Donnie said, we wanted to spend a little time on these two topics of identity and community for a couple of reasons. One is that these were the dimensions that many of you identified as your areas of greatest interest when we asked you about that last week. And because that's an area of interest, we want to try to deepen the kinds of questions and things that we consider when we think about how identity and community relate to accountability and assessment together. But we're also going to be, as you know, we've talked about it a few times now, making sense of a wide range of user data today that we've received from the empathy interviews and in the listening tour, and also our initial conversations together as a coalition. And as we do that, we're going to be challenged to try to find a way to accurately portray the many different stories of the current state of education in Kentucky. So first, let's focus on how these ideas play out in accountability and assessment, and then we'll shift to how they relate to our work for today. So sometimes communities have felt that the way that the state views them is a little simplistic. Some of you expressed that actually in our conversations last week, that there's an assumption that reading and math scores say all that anyone needs to know about a community, when in fact the story of a community is so much more than that. I myself grew up in a small town in Iowa. This is a picture of it on your screen. This could be a small town anywhere, but this happens to be West Branch, Iowa. And I wanted to share with you, kind of my experience with this growing up in this community, which was that, about a mile in either direction from this center of town, there were cornfields. There were also hog farms. Those are basically the two things going on outside of there. But also, if you went down the road this way in the picture, you would encounter this really great little 9-hole golf course, which was really cheap and was available to middle school kids and high school kids on the team. They got to play for free. And so a thing you would never know if you looked at our math and reading scores is that this town turns out as many farmers and as many college-going students and as many professional golfers, almost in equal proportion. Because kids grow up golfing a whole bunch in this town, and they grow up farming. And those two things are really important to the community and who we are. And when I was there as a kid, who we were together as kids. And it meant that if somebody came and looked at our test scores, which I'm aging myself here, but I'll tell you, we took the Iowa tests of basic skills. If you came and looked at our Iowa test scores as Iowa kids, you would have found a real even distribution, right, among our community. And you would have thought, well, this is a community that's sort of doing all right. They've got, kids performing in these different ways, some a little below, some a little above, and lots in the middle. But that wouldn't have said much really about our community. And it wouldn't have said much really about the ways in which and the success with which our community was getting us ready to go and be young adults. And so as we think about accountability, we want to think about how can we make sure there's room for us to understand communities, to see communities, and for us in our communities to feel known and heard and seen. Because we certainly care about academic achievement of our kids, but there's a lot more to tell about every community. And really, in a similar way, kind of shifting to the topic of identity, children of all kinds of different backgrounds may feel that they aren't really known as people at school. As a student, it can feel like you are evaluated for your skill, you're kind of diagnosed and placed and put in places, you're given interventions and you're given the right sort of doses of things. And that sometimes it feels like school doesn't know very much about what you dream to become or the things you already do to be a contributor in your community, because there's so much emphasis on this sort of one part of you as a student. And we wanted to pull a couple of quotes from students who are here in this group. These are off of your Padlet last time, students. A couple of things that you said. Students are generally only pressed to change until they hit what is seen as a good place. When a student looks academically fine, they're left alone. They aren't given incentives or opportunities to change, which can end up discouraging students from improving at all. Or I feel like my school doesn't do enough for low-income first-gen kids like me. I remember when I had to leave writing 101, and the only other kid to leave too was another kid like me. Which leaves us with these questions to consider. How can we know more about the identity of learners? How can we let them know that we see and we value more than just their scores? How can we know more about communities, the ones that are raising and teaching these learners? And how can we let them know that we see and value the many assets that they provide to their youth? How can we know about local opportunities that shape the career paths and community roles that each new crop of young people will play? These are all questions that we want to consider as we imagine this future of education in Kentucky. So I want to invite you just to take a moment in the chat, if you could. We've already had some good chat activity today. And write us a little note about the ways in which you feel like schools are already encouraged to know learners well and to know the community well, and ways in which that is hard to know learners well or to know communities well from wherever you sit. Take just a moment. What's already happening that encourages us this way or makes this more difficult? A note here from Susan about work-based learning. It can really help students get to know the community and help the community know students. Those are wonderful opportunities. Co-op programs too, yes. Yeah, thanks, Renita. Employment training for SPED kids, partnerships between businesses and universities, community service projects. Judith expressing a feeling that SPED families are not well known or sought to be well known. Partnerships between school and community. Focus on mutual health can foster relationships. Thanks, Donnie. Oh, they're coming too fast. I can't keep up now. One-on-one interactions are still sometimes the key, aren't they? Yeah, thanks, Phoenix. The gap kid label can be really damaging, and students can internalize that. Schools can too, can internalize that label. Thank you. So as you continue to do that, I'm going to offer just one more note to keep in mind as we enter this work today, which is the idea of the danger of a single story. And some of you may have seen this author. She has a pretty famous TED Talk talking about this. And she is a person who does not come from the United States and wrote a novel about things in her home community and had interactions with people where they came to believe that her story was like the story of her community. And having been in America, she had heard lots and lots of stories about America, and so didn't have the same temptation. And so we wanted to share this quote from her, which is that the single story creates stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they're untrue, but that they're incomplete. They make one story become the only story. And so we are going to hear some individual stories today, but we're going to not listen just to one story. We're going to listen to a few different stories, and we're going to try and figure out how we can bring those together into something called user profiles, which help us do something in between, having too many stories to work with where we can't design from them, and focusing only on one story and therefore not seeing the full picture. We know our goal is to see the full picture of Kentucky. And so Donnie's going to share a little bit more with us about user profiles and then lead us in the process of creating those today.
Hi, everybody. This is a slide that shows the way that a school that I'm pretty familiar with here in Georgia represents some of the ways that their students vary. And so the challenge for us is to build a few user profiles for each type of user, a few different student profiles, a few family profiles, etc., so that for each user type, we hear the voice of someone for whom that current approach is basically working pretty well, and that we hear a couple of voices of folks for whom it's not working as well. And we can't imagine that there's a single student voice and viewpoint that we have to attend to. And I think Kimber brought this up in her comment, that there's a focus in schools on some students, not others, and the school is sort of treating all students kind of the same. And we need to diversify the way that we think about the needs of our users. And we can't imagine also that there's a single teacher view that we have to respond to. Our task today is to internalize the different perspectives, lift up some patterns, and remember to pay attention to the nuance needed to be sure that our use of stories doesn't end up with the same kind of limited focus on just math and reading scores alone. And so this is the way that this school does that, by thinking about a unique set of characters, and they design school programs, school supports, and interactions with teachers and students all around these different profiles. I've heard them say in meetings, gosh, is that going to work for Crisis Kalu? Is that going to work for Unschooled Earl? And they use it to make sure that they're thinking about the diversity of needs within their environments. All right, if we can go to the next slide. Now, this is what we are hoping to build towards. And we're not going to be able to get completely to this place today, but we're going to build a number of these kinds of profiles for each user. This is how we'll know we'll get more than one story and still have a view that's coherent and that the local laboratories of learning can really design from. So I want to highlight a few pieces that we're to notice about this today. There's a name that just helps us connect to the person, we're referring to a specific name and a character. There are quotes, really important quotes about their experience. That's on the left. In the center, there's the person's compelling needs. What do they seem to really desire? What would really help them? And then there are important insights on the right. These are things that we've sort of understood now about this user. It's not a need, but it's sort of something about them that's important to understand who they are and where they're coming from. So we just want to put this forward so that you know kind of where we're going by the end of, by next week, by our next meeting. We can go to the next slide. Okay. So here, we're going to go into, after I share the next two slides, we're going to go into breakout rooms by different user type, and we're going to try to build some profiles. So as we go about that, how can we be sure that we share enough stories that we avoid the one story problem, and that we can preserve important nuance and be sure to create a collection of profiles in which the people of Kentucky can really see themselves without also having to collect every story and make thousands of profiles. 1,000 profiles would not be particularly useful. So because there would be too many to really try to understand and wrap our heads around. And unfortunately, there's not really a scientific answer to this dilemma, but there is a process that we can use, and we're going to use that process better if we have some ideas up front as we get started to do this work. And so we're going to start the process by finding and posting key quotes from our empathy interview in a Padlet with 2 or 3 other people who interviewed the same kind of user. So we're going to put you into groups by user type. So student, family, teacher, etc. And you'll have a shared Padlet that you'll be doing this work in. Each of you will choose quotes from your own interview and add them in a note on your Padlet. Then on a note right next to each quote, you add to the Padlet, make an important because note. What you're doing is pulling out an important quote and then telling everybody in your team why it felt important to you. All right, so you can see here that this quote says, I received report cards, but doesn't do so well. His teachers email and call pretty often. I explained to them that my son feels hopeless if all he has to look forward to is studying grades and writing. He doesn't like it and only does well when tinkering or building. School isn't set up for that. And it's important because in our conversation, this mother expressed a lot of sadness. She doesn't believe that school sees or cares about her son, about what her son does well. Our narrow view of achievement is making it hard for her son to grow and become confident in those things in which he's really capable, even those things really do have value in a number of career fields. So you're going to do this for a few quotes, and you're going to do that individually. And after 7 minutes, you'll start reading those quotes out loud and read the important because notes that you place in the Padlet too. So you're sharing out what you pulled out from your interview. Now, if you haven't done one yet, either because you just haven't gotten around to it because it's been a busy week, or you're new to our group, I'm going to put a link to some notes that you can use for that you can draw from that have been anonymized, and so you'd be able to draw from those. So we'll let you have access to that when we send you off into breakout rooms. Okay, next slide, please. Now, the next step, after you've pulled out some quotes, written a little bit about them, about why they're important, you're going to be listening to other people as they are reading out their quotes and try to figure out if there are some that relate to one another. You're going to move those quotes around so that they're clustered together on the Padlet. So along the side, you'll also see some green labels in your Padlet, and then you can think to yourself, does this grouping, is it named well by one of these big titles? Identity, for example, as is shown on the screen. And if you can think of another label that fits better, or you want to add more detail to it, you can create another green label that will help you name that entire group. So here, for example, all of these quotes have to do with schools let a lot of students down when they only value one vision of success. Okay. Gretchen, can you open up the Padlet?
Yep, hang on one second here, folks. Here we go. Are you seeing the Padlet now?
Yes. Great, thank you. So you can see the instructions, all the instructions I just gave you are in pink in those big, long boxes across the top. The dimensions that we've been talking about are down along the side on the left in the green. There are links that we'll use in round 2 that you don't have to worry about right now. We'll come back to those. But you can see if you scroll all the way down, there's an example of what it could look like when you group things. And so with this theme, we just noticed that there are a lot of quotes actually with families being happy with the communication and feeling trust because of that. And so many of these quotes are just noting specific times when people felt well communicated with, well informed, and connected with their school, between their school and the home. So this is an example of what you're going to create. Okay. All righty. So we're going to send you off into groups for about 20 minutes. So you're going to have a good chunk of time to do both of those roles, okay, or both of those tasks, excuse me. The folder I'm putting into the chat now contains some extra, or not extra, but just a selection of the many interviews that we collected from you and from volunteers from across the Commonwealth. All right, let me pause here and just see if there's any questions about the task. Okay, the Padlet is right. I'm gonna just put the Padlet links.
Actually, do you have the full list of Padlets, Donnie?
Yep, I'm gonna pull that in.
Awesome, thanks.
More Padlets than you could ever want. Padlet bonanza. Okay. So you can see here, we're going to put you into breakouts. I want to note something. We asked you to do a lot of family interviews because it's a voice that's often not present in these conversations. But for many of them, families also had a lens of seeing through the student's eyes. So as you look through the notes for that, you can notice that many parents told stories about their child and about the young person in their life. And so you can kind of think about what's the parent user, what do the quotes say about the parent, what do the quotes say about the student, and you can even create a couple of profiles even within some of those working groups. I think it'll become clearer as you dive into the interview notes that are available to you. Are there any additional questions though before we send you off? Is there any leading questions that my colleagues want to ask me so that we cover everything that people need before they go?
I think just remember, if you're in there and you are feeling a little stuck, you can come back out. You can send somebody back to the main room and we'll deploy people to come and help you. We're spreading ourselves out around groups too, but you know, you've got a set of directions right there on the Padlet that hopefully will give you kind of steps to follow. But if at any point you're feeling confused, send somebody out and we'll come in and help.
Great.
And Donnie, just to clarify, if I didn't interview anyone, what should I do? What's the source that I should be looking at?
One more time down here in the chat. This is the folder, interviews. You can access the folder of interviews, which should give you, they're all coded. They've been anonymized and you know, sort of identifying information has been removed. And it's a selection. And you have the ability to draw from any of those in your conversations.
Just say Judith asked a question, which was, if you did an empathy interview, should you return to your notes that you sent? And the answer is yes. If you did an interview, start with your own notes. But feel free to also draw from the folder that Donnie was just talking about.
Okay, so Padlet, quotes, important because, read them out, and then start to group them and name them. That is this step. We have 20 minutes. All right? Okay, we're excited to see what you come up with. Okay, we're gonna dive into this data now. Thanks so much. We'll see you soon. Easy, what was difficult? What do you still have trouble? What do you still have questions about?
So I found that exercise to be really frustrating, to be very frank, just because of the time constraint. And I'm someone who needs a little more time to sort of gather my own thoughts, and I wanted to pull certain things. And maybe if I had had a chance, you know, if I knew in advance this was the expectation, I could have done that. But I felt like it took, I don't know about anyone else, it took me a while to get up to like, oh, this is how I actually create a Post-it, and this is what is being asked of me. And then we're just getting into the depth of the conversation. So I found that frustrating. And I'm not saying it's not incredibly powerful and productive, because it's definitely moving in that direction, but I wanted like a whole lot more opportunity to dive in, because we're just beginning to unpack the quotes.
Sure. Frustration doesn't hurt my feelings. I totally understand. It is challenging. It's a mentally and it can be emotionally challenging exercise. And so, no, that's totally reasonable. That's why we're creating this reflection space for this community.
We had a small group. It was only 3 of us. Well, I don't want to exclude Brian Gong, but it was 3 of us that really literally put up our information. So I think trying to find those themes was a little bit more difficult, just because it was 3 people inputting information in quotes. But we found a theme. Communication was clear, but I think that had the group been a little bit larger, we may have seen something a little bit different if possible.
Great. That's very helpful. And Nora, I see your question in the chat. Can you make your own theme? Yes, you can. So you don't have to go by what's over in the green. You can create your own title for the collection of quotes that you've got. And because if it's telling you something important, then you should name that. And Penny, we in the next go round, first actually to the point that Judith was making, you're going to have more time that you can continue to go into just the quotes that you're pulling out and to continue to discuss the themes. And there's other sources of data, to your point, Penny, other sources of data that we're now going to add in and start to look through and layer on top. And so if you only have a couple of themes just because the number of quotes you had was a little bit limited, that's okay. Like, we're going to be adding in more now. And after we do that, we're actually going to be putting you together with other groups. So you might be able to even like start to coalesce a little bit more. So thank you for that. Okay. Any other reflections, things we should know as we go in? More time. Yes. Noted. All right. Okay, so if we can share the screen right now, I'll describe a little bit about what we will do next. You know what? I don't even know if we really need to have the screen, share the slides. Gretchen just put the listening tour data and the notes from meeting 1 discussion into the chat. We've already done some work about how we ourselves react to these dimensions and how we engage with the experience, the system of assessment and accountability. That's the notes from meeting 1 discussion. And we have literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of quotes that have come from the listening tour. And this is all really powerful first-person information about how they experience education. So both of those can be used to add in ideas, perspectives, and layers to the themes that you're already starting to build. So the listening tour data has been culled. We took the huge amount that came out of the listening tour, which I sent to you on Friday. But we also pulled out a few key themes that came up from the analysis, and we pulled out some quotes that seem to be particularly connected to our work here. And so you don't need to limit yourself to this. If you want to look at the raw data that I sent on Friday, you can also go back to that. But if this is a manageable place to begin, you can start here. The notes from meeting one discussion, we took the Padlets that we created last time, and we just tried to synthesize some key ideas that have come out, both pain points and positives across each of the dimensions. So you can pull from here and bring these into the Padlet to fill out your themes for your user. So the last time, we most of the questions were logistical, and they're like, okay, how do we do these things? I want to make sure that those things are covered, and you have the Padlets that you need, you have the documents that you need. But I want to also open up and ask questions, or allow, sort of create a space for questions about how to do this. Like, what's the approach?
Donnie, is our end goal to have one user, or could we have multiple users on our Padlet?
Great question. That's a great approach question. So you may find that as you add in more, you can sort of split it off, right? Like it actually is starting to feel like two different users. That's totally fine. You can really pull those apart, and you can say, ooh, there's really like 2 or 3 flavors of parent or family member, for example, and they have these different perspectives. And so that's totally reasonable. I just want to congratulate everybody for being Padlet champions. Everybody is really like going for the gusto with the new tech. So much appreciated. It's going to help it's the easiest way to move things around. So that's why we chose it. But we appreciate your flexibility and commitment to that. Any other questions before we send you back out? Any suggestions from the CIE team or the KDE team? Anything we want to pull up from, because other people have been in other rooms too?
This is Gretchen. The only thing I'll add is that for us in each of our teams today, the most important thing is that we get some number of quotes with this is important because statements clustered into little piles, and that we label them, excuse me, with a theme. Because even if we don't have time to do more than that, we can do some work between this meeting and next meeting to kind of pull things into the profile shape. And then you guys can keep working it from there. But it would be really hard for us to do that kind of legwork for teams if people don't get to, a pile or 2 piles or 3 piles that are labeled on their Padlet. So let's all try to get there.
We think this is important because you have the experience of talking to these people or being these people. Mm-hmm. And so you have the ability to create connections between the ideas that we can't, right? And there's a lot of data here. And so this is why the collective brain power and expertise of this room matters so much. So we really appreciate this. And we'll be, in the next section, we'll talk a little bit about where this needs to go and is going to go. And so hopefully that'll help to draw some things together too. But I know that what you need is more time. So we're going to spend, Gretchen, what's the right amount of time here?
I actually think we still could do 20 minutes now and we'll be okay. We'll just have to boogie a little bit at the end, but we're good.
Okay, great. 20 minutes, rock and roll. Are people feeling the cognitive? Oof. All right. So this is complex work, and what I'm seeing from folks and sort of hearing as I'm going around is there's a lot of sort of feelings and emotions on the Padlets, right? Like there's a lot of experiences that people have, and the people are pulling them into themes that feel real, that feel quite resonant, and that the step that we still want and need to take is to collect feelings and experiences that seem to go together into a person, essentially like a personality or a character. Because what we're trying to do is create those profiles, people, sort of a collection of experiences and insights that form a sort of a person or a character that we can help design towards and help to support. And to do that and to have multiple of those, because we know that there's more than just a single story. And it probably feels right now, if I were to name the look in all the little boxes across the screen, it probably feels like we're really far from that. Because you're like, how many Post-it notes does it take to create a person? And how many Padlets does it take to create a character and a user profile? And the answer is a lot, but there's also just a lot of sort of intuitive work that we're going to continue to do together. And it feels sort of stuck maybe right now, but there's this kind of transition that we think can occur when we continue to kind of lean into this empathizing work. What we're trying to do is really get like, who is this person? Who is this character? Who is this user of the system? And how can I understand them really deeply? So that's what we're trying to still do. Okay, let's pause here. Because what we were, and I've only seen a few of the rooms, so I was going to open and up for Paul, Gretchen, Sarah. We have about 10 minutes, and it seems like too short of a time to really like put people into selections of two teams to try to get them to like talk about the
Yeah, I think we also can do that after teams engage with the draft profiles at the beginning of the next call, and that would still be good. I think we should hold on that so that we have time to do it well. And there are some important kind of debrief and synthesis things today that we should just take time to do well.
Okay, I agree with that. From the group, can we get a general nod like, yes, let's like pause and maybe do a little debrief and reflection rather than go into a new task? Yeah. Good nods. Okay, great. Okay, so what we were hoping to sort of think through right now is just reflect a little bit on the process of trying to do what I said, like empathize, create a sort of user, and also when hearing a quote that or somebody's experience that maybe doesn't feel consistent with your own, how does that feel, right? Because that's a big leap and a challenging thing about this kind of design work is like hearing something and being challenged by it and to not always agree and what does that feel like and what is that like in this team?
So I keep finding myself going back to something Dr. Glass said at the end of that first meeting, which is essentially forget everything that you know and everything that you feel, right? He says, step out of that area, step out of your lane of advocacy, step out of your category. And that only leads to this desire for that empathy, right? So, but I think it's difficult and challenging because when you look at your quotes for the people that you did your interviews with, when you look at the raw data from the listening sessions, you tend to gravitate toward the ones that would sound like you or in that circle or your specific universe. So I think we have to be careful, and it is challenging. And that's why I think it's so emotionally difficult. There's a little bit of dissonance going on there. So I'm just curious if anybody else is feeling that, or am I just insane? Those who know me, don't just say I'm insane.
I'm not sure, Penny, that this is getting exactly at what you were talking about, but I found myself being really drawn to a quote on our Padlet about a student who said he or she didn't feel supported by their parents, and that in fact the father didn't want them to continue or pursue learning history, and even made a statement about the possibility of burning books. And I found that just like raised every hair on the back of my neck, and just really, I mean, that is just so outside of my personal experience, and it's just impossible almost for me to imagine what it might be like for that young person to feel that and to want to pursue their education. So, you know, I'm kind of pushing myself, because it is, as you said, really easy to stay in your lane. And you know that, I mean, every one of these perspectives is so important to have represented. But that really stood out from me, just to put myself in the place of a student who might be experiencing that. So I really appreciate having all these different perspectives.
Anybody else have that experience of being pushed a little bit by, you know, the experience?
So I am insane, and that's fine.
I think for me, it was just this was just a little difficult because I wasn't there for the last meeting. So just kind of picking an example and going from that, even though the example I picked, I could kind of relate to because I did work in special education. So I can understand like the advocacy part of a parent advocating for their child. So I can make a connection there, but because I didn't actually have a person that I interviewed, I had to pretty much go by like, why do I think this is important based on what information was given to me? So it was just a little challenging for me because of that.
Thank you. Well, firstly, let me just say we're glad you're here, and thank you for engaging with it and still bringing your knowledge and expertise and trying to connect with it.
And I see your hand up.
Oh, thanks. Yes, I had seen a comment too that concerned me, and I was wondering, is there a way, because I don't think they were all anonymous, right? You have a way you could backtrack to see who these students are, but some of them, I really think it might need some follow-up counseling, or, you know, some follow-up to see why they are saying some of the things they're saying. It seems like, I know if I were a principal, I'd want to know which student felt this way, or if I were their parent. But there was one comment that dealt with like almost wanting to give up, don't see the point of school anymore. Because they felt like, you know, they had done some of the harder classes, they didn't get the support that they needed from their parents. But at this point, they're saying they just don't see the point of school anymore. And that just sounds like such a lonely and almost desperate place to be in, because, you know, while you're growing up, it's like one of the things you almost know, you got your family, you have school, and maybe some outside things. So if you don't get any support from your family, and then you don't think school is there, that's not leaving much else for you except for maybe outside activities, and those are connected to school. So it just sounds like such a lonely and dangerous place. And it just seems like some outreach and follow-up is definitely needed with some of these students, and, you know, to deal with some of these comments and feelings that's going on with these students.
Thank you. Yeah, this is the challenge with the way that we're approaching this work. We're trying to tackle big systemic issues by leaning into individual stories. And that creates a lot of dissonance that I'm hearing from a number of folks, and that we have to balance and acknowledge that those things are happening. And yes, if there's a way to do that, we can consider that. And actually, it's a question in the reflection forums, like, would you like some outreach to sort of follow up? But the one thing I would also say is that we acknowledge through this process that there are multiple stories and multiple users. We have people for whom the system works. There are teachers for whom the system works, administrators, there are kids, there are parents, and then there's other stories of not being necessarily well served or experiencing disjunctions in the system. And that's what we're getting at. We're feeling both of those things, and we're seeing both of those things in the stories and in the data. So as we close out, and we're beginning this process, we're naming the current state and then describing, well, how do we expand the positive proof points that exist? How do we address the pain points that people are experiencing at every single level? Those are the two big products over the next 2 weeks. And so when we come back together next week, we're going to lean right into the same space. We're going to be sharing back with you some user profiles based on the work that we did here today, and then we'll use that to construct our shared understanding of the current system. If you want to continue to work in the Padlet, invite you to do so. We will we'll send an email out sort of saying when we're going to try to put a box around that so that we can start to work on the user profiles and get them to you by next Tuesday. But tonight and tomorrow, I think, is definitely still available time.
Donnie, just a couple of other homework notes. So if you did not have an opportunity to conduct an empathy interview, either because you weren't part of our group yet and you just found out about this today, surprise, or because you just didn't have time in the last week, we really encourage you to do an empathy interview and to be able to bring that story with you next week. And as you do that, think about whose voices we are hearing from and whose we are not yet hearing from. We made a focus together as a group to try and get family voice this week because we knew in our membership we had smaller numbers of people who are family members but not teachers. But you might want to expand that now. Maybe you want to bring more student voice into the fold. Maybe you want to go interview an administrator and find out, how is this feeling for administrators? Like students who are in this group, you might want to go interview some teachers and administrators in your schools. Community members, you may want to do any of those things. But thinking about the voices that you do see reflected in our data and those that you do not see. If you didn't do an empathy interview, please do. And even if you did, maybe consider doing another one. Just want to make sure, again, that we are collecting that range of stories. The other thing you could do to kind of broaden the range of stories that you are engaged with is to dig into the listening tour notes that we shared today, and also the themes of our own discussions from the first meeting that we shared today. This group is a pretty well-rounded group, and so our discussions together are also pretty good fodder for getting a picture of what's happening across the state. So I would recommend you spend a little bit of time looking at those two documents and or completing another empathy interview to help flesh out our collection.
And we may be reaching out to you also to do an empathy interview with some of the folks in this room, because we know that your perspective is not yet in the collection, right? And so just be aware of that. So we have one last ask and then we'll close, but there's a reflection form that I just put in that asks you just a couple of key questions. One of the most important things about a group like this is that we need to attend to how we hear and how we make space for one another. And the reflection form is anonymous and just allows you to reflect upon that and share a little bit back. We're going to be putting that data together and we'll share it back to you at the beginning of the next session. So we'll invite you to take a look at that form now.
Okay. It's 2 minutes past time. I think that means that we should end.
I think so. All right.
Thank you, everyone. See you next week.